Tim Schafer says that being inclusive makes for better video games. Ah, naruhodo, naruhodo. A brainlet take from California now. Imagine my shock. I find it very interesting because I can't think of many inclusive games that actually sold, but I can think of many inclusive games that never even got a sequel, and the entire development team was fired. And this speaks to the hubris that we witness with a lot of developers nowadays. You see, the name of the company remains the same, but the people working there, not so much. Look at Rockstar Games, for example. Right? They created GTA, one of the most renowned games around the world. Almost everybody heard of it. And now that they're trying to make a remaster of it, they're removing stuff from the game because it's not inclusive. Right? Like they're considering, okay, so the original masterpiece from the original developers is not perfect. We just need to remove stuff and the game will become better. And it's not just that, but like you notice a lot of other remakes, especially like Disney remakes, they keep removing stuff from the original, but the remake is never better than the original. It is more inclusive, right? And by the way, like, what does inclusive even mean? It's such a fucking buzzword, isn't it? It means politically correct. It means adhering to the Californian orthodoxy. And the developer here, Tim Schafer, actually goes and explains this, and you can see why it's such a brainlet take. He says that if he wants to make a horror game, he wants to make people afraid. If he wants to make a romantic video game, he wants people to feel in a romantic mood. But if he makes a comedy, it's not supposed to be hurting people. Like this is such a low IQ American take that comedy can hurt people. Like, imagine this. Imagine you're walking down the street and someone gropes your wife's ass. And then looks at you like, what are you going to do? You know, like that is a situation where a healthy, normal person needs to throw hands. Alright, anything besides that is unacceptable. If you're walking down the street and someone gropes your wife's ass, like, that is not a situation that can be diffused by words. Alright? So, you want to hurt the other person for doing that. What do you do? Are you going to crack a joke? Are you going to use some humor? It's like, oh my god, I'm going to stereotype you so bad right now, you will never recover. The Russians, you know, they're going into Ukraine. Do you think the Ukrainian soldiers are like, oh, Russians, it is time for the evil stereotype. We will create a battlefield that is so uninclusive, that is so dangerous, that is so offensive that no Russian will ever dare to set foot in Ukraine. This is literally the mentality of these people, alright? Like, from California, yeah, like, these developers legitimately believe into this ideology. I do not understand why people don't mock them for it. Like, what is wrong with everyone else in the... Why aren't you laughing at them? Like, every time they step out of their business, every single time they put a foot on the street, there should be a group of people pointing and laughing. Like, you should be laughing to tears. Like, how can you think such a thing? Like, I do not understand. You know, like, they make fun of right-wingers for believing in bizarre conspiracy theories, like flat earth and whatever the fuck, you know? And those are ridiculous. But believing that comedy can hurt people? That is just as fucking ridiculous. And not to mention, the idea that not only comedy can hurt people, but you believe you know, like you have been armed with the knowledge to know what's hurtful and what's not. Like, if I go into a room with 100 people that I never met before, and I have a comedy sketch, I have no idea what can upset people and what can't. Like, for example, I know women who enjoy sexist jokes at the expense of women, and I know men who get upset at sexist jokes at the behest of women. You don't know what is going to upset a person or not. So the onus is on the person not to be upset. Right? Like, if you are a person that gets triggered, maybe you shouldn't watch South Park. Maybe you shouldn't watch Beavis and Butthead. Right? Like, not everything has to be for you. And by the way, like, I yet to see a person that legitimately gets upset over a joke in a video game. Right? Like, that's not even directed to them. Like, you see a joke in a video game and they get, like, really upset or whatnot. Get the fuck out. No, like, humor is supposed to be funny. Funniness is subjective. Right? Like, you can't say... on one... This is what I find astonishing by the Californian mindset, right? Like, they will say art is subjective, right? So, like, if you criticize a bad movie or you criticize a bad video game, they will say, well, you can't really criticize it because subjectively you think it's bad, right? Like, if I judge ColArts and I say that the way Steven Universe is drawn looks like puke on a piece of paper, they'll say, no, that's your opinion, right? Like, art is subjective. You can't make that claim, you know. Okay, so art is subjective, but for some reason humor should be objective, right? So like, if you use a stereotype in humor, that is objectively offensive. This is why I really find their ideology to be full of holes, and the fact that they're trying to impose it on the rest of us normal people is just bewildering. And the fact that people are putting up with it and they're not complaining or laughing at it is even more so bewildering. So yeah, fully disagree with this take. I don't think that being inclusive makes for better video games. I think story can make for a better video game. Graphics can make for a video game. Believable characters can make for a better video game. Inclusivity has absolutely nothing to do. And I would even argue that inclusivity actually makes for worse video games. And of course, the metric of what is a good video game and a bad video game is, does it sell? Because if a video game doesn't sell and no one wants to buy it, then the development team gets fired, right? Like, people who worked on the game don't get paid. So I assume that when you say a better video game, you mean something that people like, right? Because like that's how it's usually translated. Not all the time, but most of the time. Like, if people like a video game, they will buy it. Because they will suggest it to their friends, they will play it, right? If people don't buy a video game, it's probably because they didn't like it. So yeah, you know, like, feel free to give me examples of inclusive video games that are really great because they're inclusive. Like, I'm really curious, like, is there a video game that you would say, okay, this video game sold really well because it's incredibly inclusive, but if it wasn't inclusive, then it wouldn't sell at all? Because I can't think of any, honestly. Like, if you come up with one, like, please do share. And this is another, like, wrong thing. Like, the best writing is never based on stereotypes. Fuck off. The Simpsons. The entire Simpsons is based on stereotypes. Almost every single character in The Simpsons is a stereotype. South Park. I mean, I can just go on and I can just name show after show. GTA, okay, a video game based on stereotypes. Right? So, like, what are you basing this on? Like, the best writing is never based on stereotypes. Who gets to decide this? I think the customer gets to decide this, and I see a lot of stereotype-based shows that are very popular. But of course, you know, because the political correctness and the gatekeepers now, which is people like him, don't want stereotypes, you don't get to see good shows anymore. Again, I'm not saying that you need to make a show with only stereotypes, but stereotypes do help. You know, like for example, The Witcher. In the first game, it's implied that dwarves, they're really good at blacksmithing and really good at banking, and humans are really racist towards those dwarves. Every time you meet a dwarf in the game, you don't need the exposure to show you that he's a really good blacksmith, right? Like, the stereotype, which was established in the beginning, just goes past that, and you understand, alright, well, this is the type of character that I'm interacting with. And then you make interesting stories and interesting relationships based on that. Maybe you have a dwarf that's not part of the stereotype. Maybe you have a dwarf that does play into it, right? It creates for interesting story dynamics. Stereotypes exist in every single culture throughout human history. It's not an American thing. It exists in China. It exists in India because it's part of human evolution, right? Like, for example, when you see a snake, some of them are poisonous, some of them are not, but like, your human mind is going to assume that, well, it's a dangerous snake, I should not touch it. Right? Like, that's how stereotypes work. They're pretty much like a evolutionary trait that we have in order to survive on the planet. And not all stereotypes are negative. Like, some stereotypes are positive. But anyway, right, let me know what you guys think. And as usual, I will see you in the comment section. Take care.